Games have a particular array of situated technological limitations that represent a specific place and time, which define each generation of video game technology for players and often trigger strong feelings of nostalgia. The quote I just read out to you from John Vanderhoof's article called Nostalgia is very much pertinent to the video you're about to see, as we're going to be taking a look at one of the most beloved consoles in video game history, with a library of games that speak for themselves, that established important conventions and design principles for their genres. The two that we are talking about today, Crash Bandicoot and Silent Hill, each contributed an enormous amount to their respective genres, while also yielding to the PS1 hardware's hampering restrictions. I'll be examining these restrictions and how they tessellate with game design by using an analytical framework, this one to be precise. Each part of this triangle informs the other. The technical limitations affect the game design, what can be told by the story is limited by the game design and technical limitations, and so on. To start off with, Crash Bandicoot has an odd place within the gaming canon, having released just less than a year after the first PlayStation console released. One of the first truly great 3D platformer mascots, Crash quickly found his place within many players' hearts, and the series spawned several successful sequels, before a lull in the 2000s with more mediocre PS2 titles, and then a resurgence in the past half-decade back into prominence. But for a while, Naughty Dog, the original developers of the Crash quadrilogy, were a critical and commercial darling. Before all its impressive success, however, the Crash series started with a daring and technically competent, system-pushing platformer, which laid the foundation for the innovation to come. In an interview with Polygon, many former and senior Naughty Dog developers discussed the development of the first game. Dave Baggett, one of the programmers for the game, commented on how the people at Sony were, quote, totally freaked out that the game was constantly reading from the CD at 300 kilobytes a second, because their models of how long the CD drive would last were based on occasional access, not constant access, unquote. Pulling almost 300 kilobytes of data from a disk per second was practically unheard of for disk-based games, and Sony worried the game would actually physically melt people's consoles. But this ability to pull an enormous amount of data constantly allowed for the developers to have room to breathe in their level design, how big they could be, what can be included in them, and so on. It was also partly the result of another major change in how the game was designed on a technical level. Further in the article, Baggett continued discussing Sony's shock and amazement at what Naughty Dog's game was doing, and that, quote, when they ran the game in their analyzer, they're like, what the hell is going on here? We've never seen a game that looked anything like this in the analyzer. It's like using 99% of the graphics capability of the machine. Nothing does that. How's that even possible? So that sort of freaked them out, unquote. Baggett explains this was because Naughty Dog used their own graphics library, which cleared up a significant amount of memory usage. In short, Naughty Dog ignored Sony's proprietary graphics API and instead implemented one that was far less intensive for the system to handle, allowing for more and more detail to be rendered on the screen at once. And Naughty Dog have continued to do this well into their current titles, pushing their systems beyond what was thought technically possible, in turn freeing up other aspects of design for innovation, with larger contiguous levels, higher graphical fidelity, and a smooth frame rate, by minimizing the technical limitations and capitalizing on what the system could achieve. However, in Japan, another development team was dealing with the technical limitations of the PS1 console in an entirely different and more thematic way. The Silent Hill franchise is one that has sadly languished for many years, in no small part due to its publisher, Konami, deciding to turn many of its properties into pachinko machines instead. But much like the first 4 Crash games, the first 4 Silent Hill games, developed by a group known as Team Silent, are remembered with a great deal of fondness, getting its start with the now classic Silent Hill 1 for the PS1. The game is notable today for just how well it's aged in a very particular way. What I mean by this is that the technically limited formal design features like the lower graphical fidelity, the poor quality and pause in the voice acting.
I don't know what happened. I'd like to find out myself.
And the outlandish and compressed full-motion video sequences only enhance the game's uncanny aesthetic. They only enhance the feeling of horror, that what you're playing just isn't quite right, and that there's something wrong and sinister hidden within it, behind the town's misty veneer. People often espouse and extol the virtues of how the fog creates a feeling of the unknown, and was itself a result of the PS1's limitations. To try and render a full view of the town of Silent Hill with the PS1's capabilities was a fool's errand, and thus the iconic fog was born to limit the view distance, in exchange for a smoother and in turn more tense experience. And sure, the fog has its shortcomings. Bernard Perron, in his book Silent Hill: The Terror Engine, describes the impenetrable fog of Silent Hill 1 as a wall never to be reached, which he notes was corrected in its widely considered superior sequel, where the player is walking through a more realistic, volumetric fog that goes from the background into the foreground. But despite this, the fog of Silent Hill still hides or hints at hiding horrors beyond its wall that the player might find if only they were to step forward. This is a decisive example in how Silent Hill maximizes its design by minimizing the impact of the hardware it's running on. As great as the fog is though, I rarely hear people discussing the aforementioned other aspects of the game's design and how it integrates itself into the game's theming. How the voice acting, though awkwardly delivered, has a dreamlike quality to it, bordering on the realistic and the absurd. That the low-quality FMVs in any other game would look dated, but here the unintentional horror of 1990s computer animation becomes, in a way, intentional. Even the controls, clunky and tank-like in its orientation, develops moments of intense terror with the player fumbling to get out of the way or pull out the right weapon. After all, the element of control is crucial to the bounded experience of fear, and when you strip that feeling of control away, you develop a keen sense of vulnerability that the player must now reckon with. Whether or not the game was purposefully designed this way with its technical limitations in mind, the end result is still the same, as Silent Hill today still has elements of effective and emotive psychological horror that arose from its limited hardware that, if anything, has led to it aging like fine wine. As the years roll on, these games are emboldened and bolstered by their technical flaws, rather than crippled by them. Crash Bandicoot managed to push the system in such a way that made Sony wonder if it would kill their console's machinery outright by squeezing absolutely everything it could out of the hardware, allowing for smooth gameplay and levels littered with detail that looked like they were ripped straight out of a highly stylized cartoon. Silent Hill, on the other hand, plays into its weaknesses and emphasizes them to evoke feelings of horror that affect the wary player and stay with them long after the game has been shut off. Each handles its approach differently, but both turn their crunchy bites, so to speak, into something special that has had enormous influence on their respective genres, and how they've continued to develop to this day.